It was a sunny afternoon when my best friend Alex and I decided to go for a walk in the woods near our neighborhood. We were only 14 years old back then, and it was summer vacation. We had been there many times before. Little did we know that this particular trip would be memorable for all the wrong reasons. We met at my house at around noon, and then headed out with nothing but the clothes on our backs. We weren't planning to go for long, so we didn't bother to bring any food or any water. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the scent of pine filled the air. We walked for about half an hour. We were still in well-charted territory that we had seen many times. We stopped to take a break and sat on a fallen tree that was partially hollowed out at the end. Alex and I talked for a bit, and then we got up to keep walking. But as we were about to turn away, I saw something. There was something stuffed into the hollow end of the tree. I walked over and reached in. What I found is the source of nightmares to this day. Inside that tree, I found a handgun. My 14-year-old mind hardly knew what to think. Alex thought it was cool, but I was terrified. It was a black handgun, but I didn't know enough about guns back then to say anything else. I'm almost sure it was real though. I put it back exactly how I found it, and then I told Alex that we had to get out of there. We walked quickly until we got out of the woods, which only took about 15 or 20 minutes. When we got back to the street, we discussed what to do. I wanted to tell my parents, but Alex wanted to keep it a secret. In the end, I decided to tell, and I didn't care what he thought. As soon as I got home, I told my mom what happened. The trail was right near my house, so I was pretty scared. My mom called the police immediately and told them what I found. Later that day, I went back with 2 officers to find the gun. However, when we got to the spot, it was gone. The police told me to stay back, and then they searched the area for several minutes before they gave up. The gun was gone. Someone had taken it. It had only been a few hours since I found it in the first place, so that meant whoever stashed it there could not be far. The police filed a report, but we never heard anything back afterwards. You may be thinking that Alex took the gun, but I don't think that could be true. He swore that he didn't, and I believed him. The dark reality is that someone in my neighborhood had a reason to hide that handgun, and they were in the woods that day. I never found out why it was there, or if it was linked to some kind of crime. What really creeps me out now, though, is that my fingerprints were on that thing. Who knows if or when they will come up. It's been over 6 years now, so it seems unlikely. It's still scary, though. I'll start off by saying that this isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard the story. I've since asked each of them, over years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay, he and our other friends were about 17 or 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. The 4 of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly which trail they were on. It was Jay and his best friend B, and their girlfriends S and M. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and hiked the trail to the river, where they smoked some bowls. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours, as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. They walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This has been paved since then, as I saw on Google Maps. It didn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot, which they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain. he noticed a huge dog. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. It was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog, about 70 yards away. It was starting to get dark, but from M's description and the drawing she did for me years later, in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge. Then one of the girls screamed that the big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen him just a couple seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in the seconds it took them to cross this 10-foot bridge. Whatever that thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My 4 friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, I can't get the key in moment, because B was fumbling madly with the keys. At this point, the dog was standing at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them. As my ex Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was closer, but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they describe it. Many times I asked them if they were sure it wasn't a bear. They would always say no. It was definitely a dog, standing on its hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in the Lane County, Oregon, in the year 2000. There are few if any bears out there. It would be odd, but then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to its own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't like talking about the incident at all, because it's too creepy for her. I'm an 18-year-old male, but I was 17 at the time of this incident. I've had some weird things happen to me throughout my life, but nothing like this. My parents were having a get-together at our house, but it seemed like it was dying down. I was getting bored, and then I got a call from one of my close friends, Luke, who wanted me to come over. I replied back saying sure, I'm bored anyway. He said that my other friends Colton, Ryan, and Matthew were also over there, and they were waiting for me. I said I'd be there in 10 minutes or so. When I got there, I walked in and couldn't find anybody at first. I looked all over the house, and eventually found everyone except Luke. I asked over and over again where he was, but they gave me the same sarcastic answer. I assumed they were messing with me, so I played along and went to look. Let me give you a layout of the house. He has a relatively long driveway that has a few curves with a barn on one side of the driveway, opposite the house. The house is mainly surrounded by woods and fields. I searched around the house for a while, and they ended up telling me that he was in the barn, so I went out there to check. When I walked in, I couldn't hear anything, so I called him on his cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I just gave up. Just as I did, I got a phone call. It was from Luke. I picked up and said, "Dude, where are you?" He replied, "I'm in the woods at the back. You have to come find me." I hung up, dreading having to walk through that dark field by the woods. Why would he go back there anyway? It was dark and cold, and practically a swamp back there. Then I got another phone call. It was Luke again. I asked why he would go back there, because it's so wet and cold. He told me to come to the tree line. Something sounded really off with his voice, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I told him I was coming, and walked through the swampy field. That's when I got another phone call. It was Ryan. He asked me where I went, and said that they were looking all over for me. I told him I was going to get Luke. What he said next made my heart drop into my stomach. He said that Luke was standing right next to him. I asked why he called me, and said that he was in the woods. Ryan told me he was in the garage, and that his phone was dead. It had been dead all day. I felt like my heart punched the inside of my stomach when he told me this. I sprinted back to the house, not caring how wet it was. When I got back, Luke charged his phone and showed me that there were no recent outgoing calls. I'm a 22-year-old male, currently in my last semester of college, and this story takes place during my freshman year at the same college. I go to a smaller university in Connecticut. It's located pretty much right at the base of a popular state park with a large mountain. If you're familiar with Connecticut, then I'm sure you can guess which university I'm talking about. There's a lot of Native American folklore associated with the mountain. Native American tribes used to live in the surrounding area, and some weird things have definitely happened there. A kid even fell to his death while hiking not too long ago, but I highly doubt that was due to anything paranormal. Behind my freshman dorm building, there was a steep hill that led into the woods. This is where everyone in our building would go to smoke weed. Halfway up the hill, there was a little cleared out space with a concrete wall that you could sit on, and then a much larger area at the top of the hill with trails and a bigger concrete wall. It was a nightly occasion for me and my roommates to head up to those woods and smoke a little. Usually there were other people smoking too, so we were completely fine going up there at any time. One night, my roommate and I headed to the hill, just like we did every night. Our other roommate stayed behind because he had to study or do homework. We climbed the hill and went to the smaller clearing halfway up, rather than the larger area. There was no one else up there, and it was a little later than when we normally went. It was right around midnight, but like I said, we felt safe enough to go up there at any time. We smoked a couple bowls and just hung out for a while. Keep in mind that both of us smoked pretty regularly, so 2 bowls wasn't going to do much for us, and I'm definitely not the type to get paranoid when I'm stoned. So our sobriety, or lack thereof, is not an excuse for what happened. It was pretty windy that night, so all the trees around us were loudly swaying. Out of nowhere, the wind completely stopped, and the trees fell silent. Then the leaves on the trees that we were standing by, very slowly and eerily, fell to the ground, all at the same level and speed. We looked at each other, and kind of nervously laughed. Suddenly, we were both filled with this sense of impending doom, like something was telling us to leave the woods immediately. I know this, because my roommate told me that he felt the same way after the fact. We grabbed our weed and full-fledged sprinted out of the woods and down the steep hill. As I was running down the hill, I fell backwards really hard and messed up my elbow. To be honest, it almost felt like I was yanked back by something. But there's a definite possibility that I just slipped on the dirt and fell because we were flying down this essentially vertical hill. I picked myself up and we ran into our dorm building, slamming the door behind us. After that, my roommate refused to go into those woods to smoke for the rest of the year. There were a few times where I went back up that hill and into those woods by myself to smoke. I didn't feel like walking across campus to go to another spot. For the most part, I was fine, and I did not experience anything. But there were a few other times when I would wind up there around midnight, and I would suddenly be filled with the same sense of impending doom, telling me to leave those woods. I haven't gone back to that area since, but I can still see the eerie way that those leaves fell around us.